Bogi. Hi, my name is Bogi Fedorko from ICRSC. I'm going to be the moderator of today's session on intersectional feminism. So welcome everyone in our Zoom meeting. I see people just like flowing in. Very nice to see you all. And we are also live broadcasting this talk, which will last approximately between 90 minutes and 2 hours, let's say that. Depends on how engaging the conversation is. So we are live streaming this discussion on Facebook under ICRSC's Facebook site, but also on YouTube. So if you look for YouTube, ICRSC, then you will see this. There is closed captions. That means, for those who are not familiar with that what I'm saying pretty fast already, sorry about that, to our amazing person who is doing live captioning. Those captions, so basically what I'm saying is appearing in the Zoom discussion. This does not appear on Facebook and YouTube. So if you need to rely on the text, please join the Zoom meeting. You should have received the link to join the Zoom meeting. So once again, for those who are joining us now, I'm Bogi. I'm the advocacy officer of ICRSC for a little bit more than 5 years. And as my title suggests, I'm leading on advocacy and campaigning initiatives. And I work quite some with sex worker activists from all across Europe and Central Asia to mainstream sex workers' rights as a crucial feminist issue. Hence, that's why I'm moderating this session. So welcome, this is day 3 of the Digital Sex Workers' Rights Festival. And this is the first of its kind organized by ICRSC. We are very privileged to have you all here. It's been quite a bad year for sex workers. I think most of you know that firsthand and from your communities. So we wanted to create opportunities to close this year, sharing experiences, exchanging on certain crucial burning topics, but also just to, be here together and just to see each other. And yeah. So that's the whole aim of the festival. So far, there has been very important discussions taking place within ICRSC's membership on mental health, for instance, on digital rights. Also, there were closed meetings for trans sex workers, for BIPOC sex workers. And we also had on Monday a public discussion on COVID-19 and its impact on marginalized communities. This last one, the COVID-19 seminar or roundtable, whatever you want to call it, you can also find the recording on our YouTube channel and on our social media accounts. So in case you missed it, just jump on ICRSC YouTube and Facebook, and they're going to be there. So I won't be talking much more. I will introduce my fellow speakers in a second. But before that, I wanted to tell you about the work of ICRSC a bit, not all the work that ICRSC is doing, but mainly the work around feminist organizing. So I know a lot of people are familiar with what we are doing, more or less. But for those of you who are new to us, to our organization, for years now, we have been initiating campaigns with our members on 8th of March, the International Women's Day. And we published a lot of resources, a lot of videos, interviews with sex workers' rights activists. In a second, I will put the campaign website address in the Zoom chat and also under Facebook and YouTube. So basically what we are trying to do is counter mainstream narratives that are exclusive to sex workers, that are exclusive to trans people, especially trans women. And we try to promote intersectional justice in European policymaking. Towards the end of the discussion, we can talk more about potential strategies that we are currently utilizing or not utilizing enough. So there's going to be at the end room for discussion. That's enough of me already. I think I heard my voice enough for today. So let me introduce my fellow speakers today. Can I have a group? Maybe I won't be able to because there is a lot of people in this discussion. Maybe I can, I'm not sure. So yeah, I just go through the speakers and you might be able to see them on Facebook or you might not. You see everyone now. Amazing. So we have the amazing Kate from SWAY, Sex Workers Alliance, Ireland, who is also the co-convener of ICRSC. So Kate is an amazing dick cream hero from Ireland. And then we have Amilka from Poland, Sex Work Polska, who will be talking about a lot of current events. As you might know, there is quite a backlash against LGBTI and women's rights in Poland. Then we have Camille from Xtalk, the UK. Hi, Camille. And we have ICRC's comms officer, who is also working with Sombrillas Latinas, a Latinx network of sex workers, and also is engaged with Trans United Europe, based in the Netherlands. So that's gonna be us tonight. And before I give the floor to all these speakers, I just wanted to highlight a couple of issues that our wonderful speakers will be talking about. So we'll talk about the Swedish model, a common threat across the region that is currently being rebranded as the equality model by a lot of abolitionist activists. We will talk about right to abortion and the ban on abortion that is surfacing as policy solutions, unfortunately, in more and more places. We will talk about the Me Too movement and how what are the pitfalls of the Me Too movement when we talk about the intersection with sex workers' rights. We will talk about women's strikes and feminist marches and social infrastructures being there and being inclusive or not inclusive to sex workers. And of course, we will also talk about allyship and solidarity and how to work together, based on feminist principles between sex worker groups and mainstream feminists or intersectional feminists. So just a couple of pointers on today's discussion. Before we start with Kate, so Kate, please prepare. I just wanted to let you know that I will be the one in charge of collecting your questions from here, from the Zoom, also from the Facebook live event, live video, also from the YouTube channel. So if you have anything important, don't wait until the end, please. Just send it in the chat privately or to everyone, and I will be collecting them and make sure that our speakers will reply to them in the very end. So let's get this started. Kate, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, and thanks everybody for being here. Please let me know if I'm speaking too fast, and I'll try and slow down. And I should say that what I'm going to talk about certainly has trigger warnings for pretty much everything. So just to say that. I'm going to speak about Ireland. That's where I'm a sex worker and director of Sex Workers Alliance Ireland. Ireland has a, like many other countries, but it's right up there with worldwide with a uniquely dark history of oppression of women. So sex workers, we very much see ourselves next in line towards people who need to realize our rights. You know, we had a referendum we legalized gay marriage there a few years ago, and brought in the repeal of the 8th Amendment, which legalized abortion just a couple years ago. So we work really hard to link our struggle to these, because that's real and makes sense. The dark history of women in Ireland is super dark. The leading anti-sex worker organization here, they have 3 nuns on their board that were running Magdalene laundries up until the 90s. Magdalene laundries were institutions for people, for women who essentially were acting out of line, were having sex before marriage. They were institutional homes where they were sending unwed mothers, and they were places of hard labor and very substandard conditions. They would take children off of the women that were sent to these places, and they were either sent to America, or in some case, or in many cases, they were separated from the women. And there was a very horrific discovery in 2016 in a town called Toom, where they found the remains of 800 children that were in a septic tank. And these were children that were malnourished, that were separated from their unwed mothers and left to die in this and put there, hidden away. Yes, the group is called Ruhama. Sometimes we don't like to mention them to give them any more publicity than they already have, but here is the name and shame. So Ruhama has also now been given planning permission to open a direct provision center for sex trafficking victims. Direct provision is their holding centers here, essentially for migrants who have arrived here and are waiting asylum, they're waiting refugee status, or they're waiting housing. They're meant to be there for a short time. They're ending up there for a long time. These are substandard conditions that they're living in. All migrant rights organizations are demanding the closure of these centers. And at the same time, Ruhama has been given permission to open one of them for sex trafficking victims. We have great evidence to know that this is going to be a very dangerous situation for people who have experienced coercion and trafficking in Ireland. Obviously, prostitution is occurring outside of these and inside of these centers because people are given extremely low money to exist on during their stay there. And of course, these groups have no analysis of what it is these women need. So that's just a little bit of a background. For the past 3 years, we have had the so-called Swedish model. We need to say it's very insidious and clever that they have co-opted the word decrim and tried to talk about it as the decriminalization model, even though we know when they bring in this Nordic model, it is always increased criminalization. So, and it's bonkers to call it the equality model because it creates so many more obstacles to survival for women. As we here all know, women need the money more than men need the sex. So in Ireland, as everywhere else, this Swedish model is used to police migrant women. So since the change in law, which has brought in, a 92% increase of violent crime specifically, at the same time that it's shown a near 20% decrease in the amount of people who want to pass on their reports. So what we have also seen since this change in law is, for the first time, sentencing of 2 young women, Romanian, one of whom was pregnant, to 9 months in jail for so-called brothel keeping, aka sharing a workspace. So part of the problem of framing sex work as gender-based violence, though we acknowledge the industry as gendered, is the erasure of male sex workers and their unique needs, those being issues around HIV, chemsex, and youth homelessness. The Department of Justice during COVID explicitly refused SWAY funding because we refer to sex work as an economic activity as opposed to exploitation of vulnerable people, ignoring the fact that we at SWAY do have an analysis of how and why prostitution can be exploitative, but they need to listen to us about what would fix that situation. I'm not sure how I'm doing for time here. I just have a couple more things I want to mention. One of them is the pitfalls and challenges of the Me Too movement. So it feeds into a discourse of women needing to be saved from men. It creates an environment and a discourse that flattens out a wide range of negative experiences around sex and inflames a sort of preciousness and sensationalism around sexual experiences in general, meaning that any discussion around agency or responsibility is silenced and called victim blaming. This is particularly bad for us because we are trying to create nuance in the conversation around agency and nuance around the conversation around the right to be safe in making hard or even regretful decisions. Of course, what this leads to is blaming prostitution entirely as the root cause of all misogyny in society. And this leads to exclusion of sex workers from the movement. It means that people are talking about it, not acknowledging our consent. And in fact, here there's a real threat of people suggesting that it become acceptable society-wide that you cannot buy consent. It's more important for sex workers than anybody that people recognize our consent, particularly because it's already tricky enough for us to talk about or seek justice for rape that we do experience at work. So I suppose the last thing I'd like to say is the importance of connecting to our allies. Like I said, the body autonomy movements, the harm reduction movements for drug users, and the anti-racism movements, and how important it is for us to move our conversation out of in-group, out of the sex worker rights movement, and into the mainstream. So for the past 3 years, SWAY has been refused uniquely of all groups that have applied, have been refused membership into the National Women's Council of Ireland. And we continue to apply and ask to be included in this organization, even though we know that we keep getting excluded. In the very least, right now, what we are able to do is to point out how horrible it is that we're being absolutely excluded from this organization. And just that fact alone serves to garner support from our allies outside the sex industry and the movement. We know that it's culture that drives change. And so it's really important that we focus on these areas. I suppose the very last thing I'd like to say is that we are doing research right now with GOSH. I think Billy from GOSH, the Gender Orientation, Sexual Health and HIV, is on the call today, and we're doing research with them. And what we're discovering, in this is with the street working population, is no surprise to us, but something we're really excited to reveal, is actually what keeps bubbling to the surface again and again, aside from the actual issues being pre-prostitution, so being the issues around poverty and challenges around drug use that led to needing to do sex work for survival. But it's been bubbling to the surface the resilience of these women and how they so often do help each other, but also look to their family female members, many of whom have been sex workers themselves, for real strength.
Thank you, Kate. As always, you mentioned, I think, minimum 20 topics that we could talk about for hours. So if anyone wants Kate to elaborate, on the Me Too rhetoric or on Ruhama, which is always a very engaging conversation to have, or any of the other 20, then drop us a line in the chat box or under the live videos, and we'll come back to those in the discussion. Yeah, there's already a question. Kate, do you have a website or anything for more information? We will drop that in the chat box in a minute. I also saw on YouTube some comments, so please drop your comments over there as well. There was one comment, oh my gosh, this is incredibly eye-opening. I share that sentiment, absolutely. So thank you, Kate, for eye-opening. There is also a remark from a Swedish person: as a Swede, I feel disgusted that my country is spreading such a foul system. Shame on us. I think this is going to be one of the ultimate messages from today's conversation. And if you're interested in more about the Swedish model, you can also, and the consequences it has for especially migrant sex workers of color, poor women, then you can visit our website, sexworkeurope.org, and we have plenty of resources there. Okay, so let's move on to our next speaker, who is Amilka from Poland. Sex Work Polska is a relatively new organization, and we have been partnering up with them since the very beginning, I think. There has been quite some turbulent times in Poland, as I imagine you are aware, with a lot of strikes involved, especially against the ban on abortion, but also against the repression on LGBTI populations, groups, and activists. So Amilka will be talking a bit about that and how the Sex Worker Collective was able to mobilize jointly with these movements that are emerging. So Amilka, the floor is yours. Welcome. Thanks for being here with us tonight.
Hi, thank you. And thank you for being here and wanting to listen to us. So if I'm going to stop somewhere, sorry, but I'm really stressed. Okay, so let's start. Since 2015, people in Poland have been learning civil disobedience while protesting against the current government. With more and more arrests of the protesting people, solidarity became more visible among people who did not agree with the decision makers. The bigger the repressions, the more solidarity, the more people on the streets. After political arrest of the LGBT plus activist Margot in August, a spontaneous protest of queer movement began under "You Will Never Walk Alone" slogan. It turned especially intense after 48 people had been detained for the simple fact of participating in it. 3 months later, right in the middle of COVID-19 pandemic, Polish government started to repress the rights of the people with uteruses. In October, the doubtfully legal Polish Constitutional Court made the already very strict anti-abortion law stricter and decided that abortion will no longer be allowed when the fetus is irreparably damaged. We stormed the streets to show that we will not accept this decision. Huge number of people go to the streets spontaneously and walk together through capital city as well as other cities and towns under the simple "fuck off" and "again, you will never walk alone" slogans. During the following days, more mass protests took place all over the Poland, even in the smallest towns of a few thousand inhabitants. Those were and are mostly spontaneous gatherings which are allowed by the constitution even during pandemic. Right now, almost 1.5 months later, both protests and repressions go on. We all act together with feminist, LGBT+, and anti-discrimination movements. We are pissed off, but thanks to widespread protest, the phone number of grassroots pro-choice Abortion Without Borders initiative is probably the best known phone number in Poland. It is on thousands of protest banners, social media profiles, and posts shouted in the street. People with uteruses in the whole country have learned where to seek safe abortion. Protest against political arrest of the LGBT activists, of those defending reproduction civil rights, have shown how huge is our frustration and how strong our solidarity is. We are pissed off, but solidarity is our strength. These protests are part of new wave of feminism in Poland. This feminism is intersectional. It postulates our radical solidarity, empathy, and care. This feminist supports sex workers' rights and support each other in our fights. Some feminist organizations support the sex workers' rights movements directly. 2 years ago, Fundusz Feministyczny, Feminist Fund, granted us small funding for our activities, outreach work, legal advice, medical support, psychological support. It is a 3-year grant that provides us within 8,800 zloty, which is around 2,000 euro yearly. Fundusz Feministyczny also founded a publication created by informal sex workers group that included information about different types of sex work, about legal aspects and the work safety in the context of Poland. Since many years, we have been collaborating with feminist online platform where we publish our manifest and comments. We also experienced strong support from pro-choice movement and organizations such as Aborcyjny Dream Team, Abortion Dream Team, and from LGBT plus community. We work closely with academics to advocate and inform about the realities of sex workers' lives and sex workers' rights movement. We work with the feminist movement in Poland in order to gain allies and not let the abolitionists take over the topic of sex work. However, there are some groups of abolitionists who are present mainly in the social media and academia and are very loud and very hostile towards sex workers. They present themselves as a radical feminist and identify with second wave of feminism, ignoring all the progress feminism has done during the last 30 years. Those abolitionists are both serfs and TERFs. They actively discriminate against trans and non-binary people. Those abolitionists are well known, and some of them are connected to the most pro-workers political Razem that causes barriers in right. However, we noticed that grassroots movement recognizes sex work as work, and we hope to get the visibility and funding to develop our activities and change mainstream left-wing and liberal politics. During the first wave of COVID-19, we have started an emergency fund to support our community. So far, we have managed to collect over 9,500 euro and support 180 persons with direct transfer and other types of help. Our support was instant and unconditional. No application forms, no certificates were necessary to get it. We have managed to support people who were regular during outreach, both outdoor and indoor sex workers. Once the news of the fund spread, thanks to media coverage, a lot of persons emailed us and some called us to get financial support. This action not only allowed us to support persons who faced very difficult situation during lockdown, but also became an opportunity to get in touch with a huge group of sex workers who weren't aware of Sex Work Polska and the types of work we do. It also strengthened the sense of community among sex workers. There was spontaneous action from the community, as many sex workers supported the emergency fund through their work, offering videos, photos, art, and services, and helping to spread the news of the fund via the social media. We need to support on so many fronts right now. In 2020, in the middle of Europe, we are fighting for our basic rights. Stand in solidarity with us. Stand in solidarity with people in Belarus, in Ukraine. There is oppression, there is resistance. Resist, act up, and fight back together with us.
Thank you, Amilka. It was great to hear from Poland. I think for a lot of years, we did not have many activists who were presenting, their cause on the international level. So I have been extremely happy that Sex Work Polska was this active in the past couple of years, especially during the countrywide protests against so many things. So it would be hard to pinpoint only 3 topics. Similarly to Hungary, where I am based and where I am from, we can't really pick our fights because those fights pick us on a daily basis, I think. So all my solidarity to all the amazing activists who are organizing in Poland right now. And thank you for mentioning your work around COVID-19 and relief distributed to sex workers. We, with ICRSC, started to monitor the situation quite early on in March. about how sex worker communities are impacted by the pandemic. I will also put a link down which contains interviews with activists, their analysis of the situation, and a lot of other background information. But to tell you a long story short, that is how the saying goes, right? What I can say from this assessment that we did with ICRC is that sex workers were on the front lines. They were the ones who were distributing aid, whether it was financial aid or food or hormones or basic sanitizer products. And they did not really meet with much feminist support. Actually, on the contrary, Kate already mentioned this, but I think this is going to come up with in other speakers' inputs as well. A lot of abolitionists used 2020 and the coronavirus to push for more criminalization. And a lot of them actually were quite outspoken about seeing the COVID-19 virus as the Abolo virus, which finally abolished sex work, prostitution. So I think a lot of clashes between intersectional pro-sex work feminists and abolitionist radical feminists intensified during 2020. So it's quite an interesting case study. I don't know if Camille will be talking about that, but anyhow, I mentioned this. I know in the UK, there were a lot of groups who worked very tirelessly on distributing aid to people, those who were absolutely, under the radar of governments, of women's organizations, of social organizations and NGOs. I recently saw a big number. Maybe Camille can tell us how much was it that was distributed to sex workers. So yeah, the floor is yours, Camille. You have 10 minutes approximately, but I'm not a strict moderator, so.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for the invitation to participate in this panel and to speak alongside such incredible activists and warriors from around the world. It's a real honor. My name's Camille. I'm speaking today as a member of the Crosstalk project, which was a migrant rights, sex worker rights project that started in 2006. Which seems like a really long time ago now. And it brought together migrant sex workers and sex worker activists and feminists into a program where we used to teach English in brothels and in sexual health clinics across the capital in London. Crosstalk's kind of developed and grown over the years, and I suppose I wanted to focus on our involvement in the women's strike here in the UK, in terms of teasing out some of the lessons, I think, in what on the ground intersectional feminist politics actually looks like and what it can lead to. So in terms of the women's strike here in the UK, the one thing I would mention is that one of the projects that Crosstalk established in 2013 was the Common House project, which was a social centre that sex workers set up in East London. And that really gave us a sense of and an understanding about how important it was to put sex workers at the centre of projects, and to not so much ask to be included in projects, but instead to kind of put sex workers and the politics of sex work at the centre of broader left projects. And Common House is still running today, and has certainly become a really important fixture of radical organising in London, particularly in East London. So with that kind of experience from having set up Common House and tried to provide a resource for the broader movement as well as for the sex worker rights community, when we started organising around the women's strike, which had been bubbling away in Latin America for years and years and years, and as a green tidal wave of kind of feminist rebellion and resistance kind of crashed onto the rest of the world, and certainly came to an incredible head with the election of Donald Trump, and the various different movements that kind of emerged through that. Here in the UK, we started organising explicitly as the Women's Strike Assembly in 2017. And there was a real question about how should we approach and what should be the process of addressing the age-old question that seems to always make feminist movements stumble, which is around obviously how different feminists think about sex work, and in particular prostitution. So here, the sex worker rights movement took a really interesting and bold kind of decision, and that was to not ask to be included, but instead to be included through calling a strike of their own. And so the sex worker rights community came together and called for a sex work strike on March the 8th. It was a strike against brothels, but the way, if you read the call to action, it was a strike, it was calling on all women and non-binary folk to strike against the bedroom and the sexualized work of the bedroom. So it was really making some links between the work that that women are expected to do for free, and the work that we do when we get paid for it, when we go out to work in the sex industry, and trying to drawing and refusing those kind of binaries, and actually calling for a mass rebellion on March the 8th around sex in general. Obviously, just picking up on some of the comments that my comrade from Ireland was making, Kate, in terms of questions around the Me Too movement. I think one thing that the Me Too movement has shown is that gendered violence is at the heart of so many labour questions for women, right? So gendered violence, we find it in the film industry, we find it in the hospitality industry, we find it everywhere, right? And so I think there's really interesting criticisms to be made of the Me Too movement in terms of, and I agree with some of the arguments that Kate was putting forward in terms of how it situates and conditions women into a particular kind of narrative that's not particularly useful. But one thing I think that is useful to draw out is that that violence at work on the basis of your gender is a really common experience for women, and that there is a basis there for intersectional feminism to build, and that if you want to know about violence in a gendered kind of capacity, you need to be talking to sex workers as well, right? Like that we have some expert knowledge when it comes to this kind of question. So having us at the table around a Me Too kind of style question is super important to be able to untangle how it is that work has ended up being such a violent process for women. So thinking about the women's strike, for the last 3 years, sex workers and our allies have taken over central London. Up to thousands of people have come out in a public demonstration on March the 8th, and we've drawn feminists with us, and we've had a really good time as well. And it's always important to remember that changing the world actually has to be fun, as well as important work. So in that kind of way, we've had flares, we've had massive banners, we've shut down central London, we've been incredibly loud, we've had massive sound systems, and of course we haven't asked permission to do so by the police, which has enabled us to have a kind of fluidity on the streets and to really bring some of the kind of experiences of other kinds of protest movements to the sex work strike. So coming out of the sex work strike, a lot of us were really interested in thinking about where we take the strike, right? Like that we didn't want it just to be a one-day event each year that coincided with International Women's Day. We wanted to think about what we'd learnt from kind of 15 years of organising in the sex worker rights movement in the UK. And so we started to think about an industrial strategy and a political strategy, and about how those two things needed to be brought together. And so one of the major issues in the UK, and I'll touch on this at the end, about what's happened in our parliament today in terms of passing the first stage of the Nordic model legislation, which needs to be fought as fast and as hard as we possibly can. And here's the thing, needs an intersectional feminist analysis to do so. So in terms of developing that industrial strategy, we set about thinking about what it would mean to unionize the sex industry in the UK. And so to do that, we we hooked up with another base kind of independent radical union called United Voices of the World. And in 2018 set about unionizing some of the most legalized and visible workers, predominantly strippers, and dancers in clubs, because they had employment contracts that we could take their bosses to the employment tribunal and fight in the terrain around employment law. And we also recruited full service workers and started to think about what union strategies were appropriate within a criminalized context. And so that unionization campaign was really similar to lots of other union campaigns. Like our activists got, sacked, and they got intimidated, and they got pulled into back rooms, and they got yelled at. And if you talk to other union organizers, that's what happens in most industries, right? Bosses hate unions. There's a reason why bosses hate unions. It's because it's through unions that workers are able to collectively get actually what's theirs, which is the huge amount of profit that we make for people who own all of the establishments that we work in. And at the same time, we launched Decrim Now, which tried to bring together all the different sex worker rights organizations into an umbrella campaigning front. Because at that point, the Labour Party looked a little different than what it looks like now in the United Kingdom. And the leader of the Labour Party, the leader of the opposition, was Jeremy Corbyn. And for many years, he had campaigned and been a supporter of decriminalisation. So that strategy was also developed from our analysis of what decriminalisation has meant around the world, and that we would like to see, if we were going to win decriminalisation in the UK, we would like to see that the industry was unionised and collectively organised, so that in the instance that workers are able to work legally, that they have a collective voice at work, right? And so, and in that instance, it's really important that that we try to organise the industry as much as possible into unions in our fight for decrim as well. And so I'm happy to report that after kind of 2.5 years of fighting bosses in strip clubs up and down the country, we won workers status for strippers and dancers in the UK in February of 2020. And that was that we finally ended up in the employment tribunal, and the judge agreed with us that dancers were not self-employed, which is what bosses always try to say, that we're self-employed workers, and when you're self-employed, you don't have any rights. And so the judge agreed that dancers and strippers were workers. And the reason that we were organising strippers as part of a decriminalisation campaign was because we wanted a case study to be able to point to and say, see what workers who are legal can actually do. They can get together and they can end up in an employment tribunal and they can get more rights. And that's why we need decriminalisation. We need decriminalisation so that workers are able to advance their own interests. We don't need a series of laws that tell us how and where we can have the sex industry in terms of legalization, and that the people who are best placed to know what changes are needed in the industry are workers themselves, organizing collectively. One of the other really powerful processes that organising not within a sex worker union, but instead within a general union has brought us is that we've been organising with other workers, care workers, cleaners, women working in the charity sector who work on gender-based violence. And together, we've been able to share strategies. We've been able to think about how to overcome some of the divisions that still exist in women's rights organisations around this kind of question. And we're doing it on the basis of all being workers, right? Which is a really super powerful position for sex workers to have that debate within. And I find that the unionisation question really gets at the heart of a lot of the debate within feminism, in terms of making the argument about why we need a certain kind of feminism and why we need to understand sex workers' work. Just to finish off, because I'm sure that I will have nearly gone over time, Obviously, that court case was in February of 2020. I think about 3 weeks later, I make a joke that it's the shortest Labour victory that the Labour rights movement's ever seen, because 3 weeks later, coronavirus closed every single one of those clubs that we would have rolled out that judgment to. But what we did see that came about as a result of coronavirus was activists in SWARM, which is the sex worker advocacy resistance movement, working together with Crosstalk and a number of, and the English Collective of Prostitutes, a whole array of sex worker rights organisations, came together to put together a mutual aid fund for sex workers. And I'm pretty sure that they raised over £250,000, which is an absolutely huge amount of money. And we're able to distribute that in very small payments to thousands of workers. And so that effort really demonstrated the depth and the breadth of sex worker rights organising and a commitment to making sure that no one is left behind, which I think is actually at the heart of what intersectional feminism needs to really grapple with in terms of thinking about it in a practical kind of way. Thanks very much.
Thank you, and thanks for also clarifying what you mean by intersectional feminism. I think we are getting a lot of examples from different organizations' practices that, in my view at least, can be categorized as quite intersectional. And we also get a good deal of examples from mainstream women's rights organizations, or whatever they call themselves, what could be categorized as not intersectional. So we have been hearing a couple of those. There is a discussion going on in the chat, so I just wanted to capture that. Kate, your video is off, but I would like to ask you to prepare with a bit more information about the Me Too movement, and you know, how it intersects with sex. Not now. I just wanted to give you ample time to respond to a couple of questions around that towards the end. And there was also a book mentioned, We Too, which is Essays on Sex Work and Survival, a collection of narrative essays by sex worker responding to the resurgence of the Me Too movement, and sex workers from across the industry complicate narratives of sexual harassment and violence and expand conversations often limited to normative workplaces. I think that's very good that someone mentioned that. Maybe in the very end, if you have read this, or if you're familiar with how it was made, you could tell a bit more about that. There was a question whether it will be translated into French or other languages. So towards the end, you might respond to those questions if you know. If don't, then we'll figure it out later, I think. Yeah, so we have one more speaker, Alejandra, from Sombrillas Latinas and Trans United Europe as well, who told me in the very beginning that would like to address a couple of questions around mainstream feminism, or what she prefers to call mainstream feminism, white feminism. So let's get to that issue. You have 8 to 10 minutes, Alejandra, and everyone on YouTube and Facebook and in the Zoom meeting, please prepare your questions or just topics you would like to hear more about, because I will be going through all of these chat boxes while Ale is speaking, and then I can prepare speakers as well to respond to your questions. So Ale, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Boogie. And well, can you hear me well? Okay. So I was thinking, because a lot had been said by the previous speakers about feminism, and I wanted to focus this talk about intersectionality and how intersectional movements have not yet reached mainstream feminism, and also how, because of that, many groups are affected in this process. And I would like to say that, especially thanks to these mainstream abolitionist groups, many communities are being over-policed, are being affected, especially migrant communities, refugee communities, sex workers communities, trans communities, racialized communities, Roma communities. And I would like to talk more specifically about the feminist groups in Spain, which is a group I'm very close to due to Spanish being my first language. And what I want to say, for the first time in history, there is a left government in place in Spain, which in the beginning brought a lot of hopes for everybody, for changes on behalf of, again, minority groups. But sadly, these hopes have not translated into reality, because what we have seen is, and especially with the current COVID pandemic, is that on the push by feminist groups to protect women, quotation marks, there have been bills and legislations that have done actually the opposite. I'm going to give you some very brief examples. One of them is that during the previous lockdown in Spain, and right after, feminist politicians, so-called feminist politicians, pushed for the closing of brothels in order to protect women from falling into the cracks of prostitution. And they did so in several municipalities of Spain, but they never took into account any measurements of what will happen to these women after they were not able to work. What they don't realize is that when you don't have, in many cases, other way of income, because either you are undocumented, because you are a trans person that cannot have another job, or when you are, again, a racialized cis woman, trans woman, you might not be able to get a job anywhere else but with sex work, right? And they did close, they managed to close these spaces, again, with not taking into account the needs of sex workers. And several groups like Otras, which is the Spanish sex workers union, APROSEX, Colectivo de Prostitutas de Sevilla, called them out on this action, but they were and they still been ignored by these politicians. Now, this is something that we have noticed repeats everywhere in the Americas, that is Latin America and North America, and in Europe, in which feminist politicians are so disconnected with reality that they push for these kind of laws that end up worsening the situation of many. And what other point? Yes. So I'm speaking about Spain. But it's not just about closing places of work for sex workers, but they also push for measurements to take away children from Gitano communities, from Roma communities, especially single mothers, and also from racialized women from Africa and from Latin America. And Linda Porn, she is a sex work activist from Spain who is also a member of Sombrillas Latinas, have published a book. I will check if I can find the link to the book so I can share it here, in which she gives in detail information about how the adoption system has become more of a business in Spain, in which social workers trying to find ways to remove children from their parents, mostly single mothers, so they can be given away, or she not given away, but given away for money, basically, to well-off Spanish parents who cannot have children or else. And so my point here is that this kind of feminism is very disconnected from the realities of the majority of people, of migrants, of trans migrants, and racialized women. That because of that, it ends up creating the opposite effect of what it wants, which is empower women, and instead it pushes women and more into the background and more into dangerous situations. Now, so I wanted to talk about this part of white feminism in Spain. And my other point that I would like to talk is about how this feminism has forgotten trans persons, trans women, and trans sex workers. And we see this especially in the UK, where it's this big backlash against trans communities. But also we see it in a more subtle way everywhere else, where trans persons, trans women are not given entry, or their voices are not heard by mainstream feminist groups. And on this, I want to talk about, I have it right here. Yes, I live in the Netherlands, and many people think of the Netherlands as this very open, very liberal place. And I am currently doing a report with SAID, which is a collective of migrant sex workers in the Netherlands, and with Trans United Europe, which is an organization by transgender women of color in the Netherlands. And we're doing this report about access to justice by migrant sex workers. And what we have found out is that migrant sex workers, especially, do not have access to many of the services or access to working legally, because the system, although is regulated, is a system that is almost impossible to access by undocumented persons or a person who do not speak English or Dutch, because of the bureaucracy limitations. Now, we're going to present the report next week on the 17th of December. And one interesting thing about what we have found out is trafficking, because abolitionist groups always, or not always probably, but tend to conflate trafficking with sex work as if they are the same thing. And what we have found out is that the lines are so blurry that for what one person or one legal entity, it can be considered trafficking, it might not be for the actual migrant sex worker. One of the persons that we interviewed for this research, she mentioned that she was being helped when she first came to the Netherlands. She did pay the person that helped her to set up her business, basically, or to know the how-tos of doing sex work in the Netherlands. And when we asked her, but do you know that in the Netherlands this can be considered trafficking? And she mentioned, it might be, but it wasn't trafficking for me, because in the end I was being helped and I just repaid back. So I think it's also important that feminist groups, abolitionist groups, really listen to what we have to say, what sex workers have to say when they want to pass laws, when they want to make events in which they talk about trafficking, or when they talk about sex work. because only then and only when they hear our voices, they will be able to fully understand and to fully provide the help that they so desperately want to give to victims, because they are victims in all kind of jobs, and of course there are probably traffic victims in sex work too. But it's important we don't put the two things together, and it's important we don't consider all sex workers victims, because and then we will be missing really good information and how to help those who really need help. Last, I'm a little bit short. I want to invite you to the webinar that we'll be doing on the 17th of December with Safe and Transunited Europe. It's going to be at 2 p.m. And we're going to talk about all the intricacies of being a migrant sex workers in the Netherlands. And that will be all for me for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Alejandra. And thank you for mentioning, transphobia in the mainstream, or white or carceral, or whatever terminology you're using, feminism. I think it's also important to note that during the COVID-19 crisis, a lot of states have been pushing for anti-trans legislation. So in the country where I'm staying, Hungary, there was an anti-trans bill pushed through. I don't know if you know about that. In Romania, kind of like parallelly, there was a law that was proposed, and now it's being reviewed by the Constitutional Court on banning gender education, so any kind of education connected to gender. And also there was similar attempts, just like in Hungary, in Russia, taking away the right to legal gender recognition from trans people. So it's quite striking to see, how anti-gender forces use the COVID-19 crisis to, initiate all these awful proposals against trans people. And I think it's also interesting, in quotation marks, it's interesting to see, how for years, at least in my experience, people were, radical feminists, they are just a tiny minority. They are, sex worker exclusive or trans exclusive, but, no one will come for trans people or sex workers. I hear this narrative a lot. And yet it might not be the radical feminists, getting these legislative actions across, because at least in Eastern Europe, they don't have that much leverage and power. But I think it's also very important to analyze how, all these anti-gender actors from church, from state, from the left even, and feminist circles as well, how they unite as a glue, and how gender as the enemy unites them in a way, and how that impacts trans people, non-conforming women, sex workers as well. That's a totally different discussion. I just wanted to throw that in. But thank you for mentioning. And I did not even mention, how these groups are financed by US evangelicals, or actually groups close to Trump circles. Yeah, another big story. But while Ale was speaking, I took notes of the questions that you were asking. So Kate, you're going to be the first to respond and to clarify your stance on the Me Too movement's inclusivity or exclusivity to sex worker narratives. And then I would like to ask Camille to answer the question about the post-Brexit. I mean, as much as possible at this point. I don't think even, your prime minister could answer that super elaborately right now. To answer that question about EU migrant sex workers. So what's going to happen with their status in the UK? What do you know about that? How do you organize around that with sex worker? And then there was a question around how sex worker struggles are intersecting with anti-racist efforts. So any one of you is welcome to answer that question. Ale, Camille, Amilka, Kate, whoever. I just say that ICRC is working quite much on migrant sex workers issues. I will put in the chat our latest resource on access to justice for migrant victims of crime. We also have a video on our YouTube channel when we launched the publication. So this is pretty much a big area for ICRSC. So anti-racism, migration, and its intersection with sex work. Yep. And then there is the fourth question. So I don't know who wants to answer that, but I find it quite interesting, from Carol, about anti-carceral approaches. I'm not sure everyone is familiar with this term, especially in the European context. I don't think that we use it as much as we should. I don't know. So anti-carceral approaches in sex workers activism. So if anyone wants to comment on that. So anti-carceral, in my understanding, means non-punitive, not using criminal law, but more focusing on the well-being of the community, the security of the community, and not necessarily finding the optimal solution in more policing, more incarceration, which we tend to see a lot with white feminism or carceral feminism, who are advocating for more and more criminalization of this and that. So, okay, I think everyone can work on their questions now. And then let's hear Kate about Me Too.
Thanks again. So the bottom line, is always that, sorry, I'm hoping my phone isn't going to die. I'm having a little trouble with my charger here. I'll get this out. So the bottom line always is, nothing about us without us. And, it's particularly useful and important that we be included in spaces and in movements that are antagonistic towards us, that are attempting to exclude us, or that are threatening progress that we're making. And in this way, the Me Too movement is really challenging for us. In a broad sense, it pushes a sanitization and a heteronormativity around sex, including a hysteria around age gaps. So sex workers know more than anyone that sex, desire, and consent are actually very complicated and messy concepts. The Me Too movement threatens progress that we've made around asserting that sex can be transactional for survival, for money, or for power. Well, we should not be afraid of telling women and young women that there is room for them to own the decisions that they've made, even when the decisions are seated in desire, in need, in infatuation, or even a very normal naivete. It's not mutually exclusive in the cases that someone does need to be admonished for taking advantage of a power dynamic. Victimhood, it cannot be the only string in our bow. And if you will, to this tune, the Me Too movement and the Swedish model, unfortunately, right now go hand in hand. I hope that answers your question. Feel free to ask me more.
Yeah, or if it's easier with the video on, we can also give you the floor. So if you have any specific questions to what Kate was telling about. Camille.
Yeah, I suppose I wanted to come back on the question around Brexit, and I think it's important to think about the hostile environment that the Tory government and the Labour Party have created for migrants in the UK, that produced the social and political conditions that made Brexit possible. So Crosstalk, as I said, was a migrant rights sex worker organisation that was formed when there was really, we were at the peak of the kind of anti-trafficking policies and initiatives and campaigns, and that was under the new Labour government, when there was a lot of what I would call state feminism, feminists who were in power within the state, who were enacting what other people on the panel have called white feminism, which we could call mainstream feminism. Were enacting those kind of policies from the levers of government. And Crosstalk was about saying that we wanted to be able to organize as migrant sex workers to make an intervention so as to, like, as Kate was just saying, so as to have our own voices and not be spoken about and for. And so really the London Olympics, I think, is a really important marker to mark in terms of really a ramping up of the disruption of the sex industry in the UK and going after those workplaces where migrants predominantly were working. So in the East End, where the Olympics was held, the government and local governments raided and shut down hundreds and hundreds of premises. So actually the repression against migrant sex workers has been going on in the UK at a really intensified rate in London. And just to note that to do sex worker organising in London is to do migrant sex worker organising, because the industry, you know, never believe anyone who tells you statistics about the sex industry, but it's around about, you know, 60 to 70% of the industry in London are migrant sex workers. So it's the majority of the industry in London, and that's really different to other parts of the UK, where it's still very much working class women and women of colour as well who make up that population. So in terms of Brexit, as a migrant myself, the only available option that people have is to apply for EU migrants, is to apply for something called settled status. And one of Crosstalk's spin-off projects, which is the Radio Ava, which is a radio station run by sex workers, which used to be housed at Common House and has now moved to another venue with other radio amazing people. Put together a special program that was answering a lot of those questions about how to get settled status. And so if you look up Radio Ava online, there's a bespoke episode that's directly on resources for sex workers to navigate Brexit. And I know that the sex worker rights organisations have been doing lots of information sharing and briefing for people. And we would have done a lot more had coronavirus not come along, and we'd be needing to do briefings on how to get people signed up to benefits and to navigate that system at the moment. In terms of, I think people's comments in the chat are really bang on in terms of what we've seen in the last year with the Black Lives Movement. Has seen a blossoming of ideas and politics that reject the carceral system as a system of justice that actually is part of the problem, not part of the solution. And we've seen ever more increasing confidence to reject institutions like the police and the prison system, and to really understand what role the prison system and the police play in producing violence and producing structural violence and structural harm and exploitation. And I think that just like the feminist movement needs sex workers at the table to talk about violence and work, the abolitionist movement, we have a place at that table as well. And that's got to do with the level of criminalisation that sex workers have faced, not just obviously in the UK, but the world over. And that it's not a surprise that sex workers are some of the leading kind of voices around abolition of the police and of the prison system, because we know intimately the role that kind of system and logic plays in producing structural violence in our lives. Over and out. Thank you.
Thank you. There's going to be also a discussion within the Digital Sex Workers' Rights Festival this week on policing and criminalization. I think, if I'm not mistaken, this will take place on Friday, but you can check the festival page. So I think there's going to be more discussion on these issues, and, you know, like generally like carceral approaches to improving lives for sex workers as well, and their criticism. I'm sure that's going to be addressed. Alejandra and Amila, did you want to react to the intersection of anti-racist struggles with sex workers' efforts, or did you want to address any of the questions so far? If not, or while you're preparing, I wanted to ask everyone from the speakers to also think a bit outside of what we have been mentioning here, you know, like how sex workers organized for their communities from the front lines during COVID-19. And yeah, let's zoom out a bit from our own daily work and struggles. And I wanted to ask you if you have come across this year or in the past couple of years any feminist organizing, any examples of feminist organizing that was very inspirational to you. You know, it doesn't need to be in your context. It can be, you know, a story that you got to know having spent all your life online in the past couple of months. So just to end on a, you know, kind of like an inspirational note. So Ale.
I actually have a response to your last question, but I suppose we leave it to the end, right? The inspirational feminist.
No, go ahead.
Okay, so for me, it will have to be the feminist groups from Chile in South America, who in Chile, there was this constitution that traced back to Augusto Pinochet, who was a dictator for, I think, 15 years or so. And he left, but the constitution he created remains. And for decades has been the talk of making a new constitution, a constitution that reflects this century, right? But it was, everybody says it's not going to happen, it's written in stone, you name it. But 2 years ago, when the big protest started in Chile, which actually were led in big part by feminist groups, they finally managed a couple months ago to succeed, and there's going to be a new constitution in Chile. And this group is, I think, very inspiring because they have been very open to topics like trans inclusion, so they managed to change the constitution. They've been protesting from a new way of government in Chile that is more inclusive and accepting for everybody. And this is a group of feminists that have inspired similar movements in Latin America for pro-abortion, pro-choice. I should say it, pro-choice, and also for trans inclusion. So that will be one of the groups that is really, really inspiring. And the other one will be the sex workers led by Amar in Argentina, which have managed, against all odds, that sex work has been recognized as work by the Argentinian government. And many times, I come from the global South, many times in the North, people don't take into account what's happening in the global South. But I think Argentina and Chile are showing us that also from the global South, there are changes that you can learn from. Not to mention that Argentina was the first country in which this, as a trans person, I'm happy about it, in which your identity, you could define it yourself instead of being diagnosed by a doctor. So these three things will be very inspiring for me.
Thank you. And what about the others? What have you been inspired by this year? Camille.
You just stole all of mine in terms of all the words I was going to say. So I also would say that the women's movement and and trans movements in Latin America have really provided a huge fire for us all to access, and the heat and the energy from the Ni Una Menos movement has really personally for me reshaped what a feminist horizon can look like. And I totally agree that it has been such a powerful and useful educational tool for that to be recognized as coming from the global south and to be the leaders of the feminist movement at the moment in the around the world. And I think that's where Latin American movements are in that way. But I also would say that to our Irish sisters who won through popular vote the abortion struggle, that was an incredibly powerful and very instructive process of really going against, such an entrenched Catholic country and such incredibly long-standing ideas around women. And you talked about some of them, Kate. So I actually also wanted to mention the fight in Poland and the strikes in Poland, which were just an incredible, like a vitamin B shot in the arm that we all needed and continue to need. Right? During the pandemic, we've seen hundreds of thousands of our Black siblings all around the world take to the streets, and we've seen Polish women and feminists take to the streets in a way that I think really shows that even though we are in a really terrible crisis that doesn't look like it's going to get any better anytime soon, that we actually do have the tools and the courage and the really smart ideas to get ourselves out of this, and we just need to keep going.
I suppose I'll piggyback on that to say it's been really inspiring to see Romania have a long-awaited sex worker rights group come along. My Romanian friend told me that she and her Romanian sisters call Romania Pussyland because there is so much sex work activity in and out of Romania. So that hopefully will play out strongly on a global stage, and I think it will. Also, just to say about Ireland, I was going to mention it as well, just to see Ireland come together, especially in the face of so much shaming and hiding of people's stories, that what was really to note, I think, about that in abortion rights campaign, I think Linda Kavanagh from Sway might be on this call as well, but it was people sharing their stories that worked in Ireland. And I think for sex workers, understandably, we don't want to tell our stories sometimes because people are intrigued by our stories more than anybody because they're sexy or they're salacious or trauma porn or whatever. But I think it just reminded me of the strength and sometimes reading the room and saying, what with this group of people, what with this audience, what with this culture is going to really get the message across. And I think for sex workers, sometimes when we don't tell a story that they're asking us about, doesn't it make them double down and have a perverse obsession with it? So sometimes answering the questions when we have the strength and safety to that we think can sort of create a more let's say nuanced again description of our experiences is really important. Like, people connecting with us on a personal level is actually super important, and Ireland did a great job with that. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah,
I'm proud of freaking everybody here, though. P.S. Everybody's doing such amazing work. Amazing work. We all need to come together for Scotland and England right now, and go Malta towards decrim, just the whole lot. Yeah.
I second that. Amilka, I will give you the floor just in a second. I also wanted to add my key feminist moments. There has been a lot, I think, but the ones that haven't been mentioned yet are connected to sex workers as well. So yeah, Kate was mentioning the sex work call from Romania, and Antonella, who is an amazing Romani trans sex worker activist, was running for a municipality position this year, but so was another trans woman in Ukraine as well. So I think even in this corner of our continent, of Europe, there are things happening in terms of visibility, and people who have not been provided too much opportunities by the mainstream feminist movement claiming and taking space. So those were really, really good moments for me this year, along with seeing Polish activists, fellow activists, sex workers, trans people included in the fight against the abortion ban. So thank you for all that in 2020. Amilka.
I just want to say that, I was really impressed by how Polish people stand together to fight for their rights. I mentioned in my speech about the protest, and it is like it lasts for more than a month, and we are still protesting, and it is amazing to see that people are together. They fight together, like radical empathy, radical solidarity, and radical rudeness, and things like that. So yeah, I think that's all what I want to say.
Thank you. Thank you all. If there is anything else, just feel free to share. There was a very important question in the chat to Ale. When is that report launch taking place, or what is the social media platform that people can follow through? So please, Ale, put that into a link, or just like your Facebook page, where next 17th, right? So next week, 17th, there's going to be a launch of a report on sex workers, migrant sex workers' access to justice. So you can follow up on that as well. And please go to sexworkeurope.org or ICRSC on Facebook and YouTube, and Sex Work Europe on Instagram. And I'm sure I'm forgetting some other platform I'm not part of, and I hope I will never be, but I'm glad if you are. So there's amazing events happening this week. There is a film screening starting soon, I think, about sex worker representation on film. I have been wanting to watch this documentary for ages, so I can't wait to do that. But there is other important discussions as well tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. Thank you. I am quite exhausted having looked at the Zoom chat box, the YouTube, the Facebook. I can't imagine what millennials who are working on social media are experiencing, 8-9 hours per day. I might have missed some of your remarks. I'm very sorry about that. I'm not really a tech-savvy person, but I see that a lot of you sent in messages. Amazing panel. Thank you so much. Excellent job, Bogi. Check, save, and that's a different one. That's from Ale. Check, save, and Trans United Europe Facebook page for the event. Brilliant discussion, and so on and so forth. Thank you for the feedback. It's always easier to be online, with this many people if there is information coming and going. And that was us. Once again, thank you, Camille. Thank you, Kate, Amilka. It was a pleasure to meet you, Alejandra, and everyone else who was listening in. The video will remain on the Facebook and the YouTube, so you can also share it with colleagues. Please spread the words about what sex worker rights activists are thinking about intersectional feminism. It is a crucial topic in 2020 and will remain so, hopefully, in 2021 as well. Thank you, and see you throughout the week. Bye-bye.